Dr. Peggy Semingson, an assistant professor of literacy studies.
And I'm Dr. Jodi Tommerdahl. I'm associate professor of mind, brain, and education.
We want to talk about the topics in language that can be a little bit tricky for people studying to be teachers. So we'll go through some terms, tell you what they mean, and tell you how they apply to teaching. So can you tell us about phonetics and phonology?
Sure. And I'll just add before we start that what I wanted to do is kind of provide a breakdown of different levels of language, because sometimes when you're talking about language, because it's such a unified thing that we experience very holistically, we don't feel like, oh, now I'm using my grammar, now I'm using certain elements of sound, that we just kind of chop it up artificially. And it's really good because teachers have to read a lot of texts about like phonics and phonological awareness, especially when they're learning to teach how to read. So I thought it'd be good to have just kind of that breakdown of when we're talking about this area of language, it's called this. Mm-hmm. So you asked me about phonetics and phonology?
Yeah, what are they?
Well, I find a lot of people confuse phonetics and phonology because both of them have something in common, and it's that they're both about sounds, about the study of sounds. But the difference between phonetics and phonology is that phonetics is more, for example, looking at sound waves and analyzing individual sounds, whereas phonology is more about sounds in a language, sounds that are in combination with each other and how they interact with each other. So teachers probably need to learn a lot more about phonology than they do about pure phonetics.
That makes sense. And so phonology has to do with when we teach young children sounds like alliteration and hearing syllables.
And what kind of sound patterns that we have in a certain language, like children understanding that the sounds SP and R make together, that is a typical acceptable English sound combination. We start words with spr, but we don't start them with like LKT, looked something. Mm-hmm. That would be breaking an English phonology rule.
Okay, good. And those I've always heard are sort of naturally taught, like when a mother will sing to her child.
Yeah, absolutely. We are teaching our children phonology, or using our natural phonology, when we use what we call motherese. When you talk to a baby, or even when you talk to a puppy and you talk to them with very exaggerated tones, you slow down, there's more division between the syllables, and children are pulling out all that phonological information and using it systematically and statistically in order to develop their own language.
Okay, great. And then tell us about semantics.
Semantics is a pretty straightforward level. Semantics is about words, and often like individual words. So when we're talking about a child's vocabulary, we're talking about their semantic level. But it's not just about the size or what they have in their vocabulary, it's also their understanding of the relationship between different words. So understanding when different words are related to each other, when they're opposite, when they're similar, all of those connections that we have in those semantic nets, we call them. So understanding that hot and cold are opposites, or that you have superordinate categories like animal with all of the different kinds of animal names underneath them.
So when we talk about synonyms and things like that, that's semantics?
Absolutely. Vocabulary, synonyms, antonyms, all those relationships.
Good, good. And that helps with comprehension, of course.
Oh, yeah. So you can see right away how teachers would be monitoring that and how it's very important to look at children's semantic ability.
And children use semantic clues in the text when they read to see if it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So a good foundation in semantics is really important to reading comprehension.
So I always ask kids when they mess up on a word, does that make sense? If they said a word that didn't make sense, semantic sense, while they're reading.
Yeah, that's perfect. Then they're using their phonics, which is different from either of the things we talked about before, but that ability to decode, they're using that and then putting it together with their semantic knowledge, thinking, does that make sense? So, bringing it all together. Exactly.
That's good. How about, these terms can be confusing, grammar and syntax, and maybe even morphology. What are those?
Well, just to make it easy, I use grammar and syntax as if they were just, completely interchangeable. I know some people don't, and you can, look at different definitions where they say there's this slight difference, but for me, grammar is pretty much what you think about grammar. Things like, it's about word combinations really. And syntax for me is the same thing. And also sometimes you hear about morpho-syntax. We'll get into that. But really, grammar and syntax are just about word combinations, putting words in certain orders in order to get the meaning that you want out of them, and also decoding the word order, so you can tell the difference between the dog bit the cat and the cat bit the dog, all the same words, but the different word order makes a different meaning. But it's also things like, you know, those word endings to put something into a past tense in English, maybe adding on an ed if it's a regular verb. And that's where we get into kind of a subcategory of grammar or syntax called morphology. Morphology is like grammar, but it's within the word. It's not about combining more than one word, but it's about just adding something on or breaking a word into its grammatical parts. Like if I say, I'm eating, there's eat and there's the ing. And so there we're not really looking at the grammar of eating, we're looking at the morphology because it's all within one word. So morphology is the same as grammar but within the word, and syntax and grammar are above the level of the word, one, two or more word combinations.
And that's really helpful for children learning English, is to learn morphemes so they can help unlock meaning.
Yeah, and you know, any language, because all languages have morphemes, and some put more morphemes together than others. So, and that's one of the most complicated parts sometimes of learning foreign languages, when you learn that what's one word in English, for example, doesn't necessarily match up because you have to add on more morphemes. You know, like in some languages, the subject will be added on to the verb, like a he or a she might just be a prefix that you put onto the verb.
It's a different order.
Yeah, I know, yeah, and kind of things get sliced up differently.
That's true. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, thanks. And then lastly, pragmatics. What is that? What does that have to do with language?
Well, I figure we've been working our way up kind of from the bottom, like, you know, the smallest element was the sound, then we have the word at both the semantic and the grammatical level, and then when you get up to pragmatics is kind of that higher up level, and some people call pragmatics the wastebasket of language. If something doesn't fit into the other layers, it must be pragmatic. But there are kind of some main areas in pragmatics, and one of those is politeness, like knowing what kind of tone to use with someone that you're speaking with. So a child learns pretty early on that they don't speak the same way to someone elderly that they don't know very well, the same way that they speak to their siblings at home. It's all about, you know, registers.
Register, yeah.
There's also a lot of other things included in pragmatics, such as inferencing. So drawing inferences, logical conclusions, potentially possible conclusions, really important when you're reading between the lines and pulling all that information out of the text that's kind of there but not completely explicit.
Using clues.
Yes, all of that, that's pragmatic ability.
Okay, so yeah, that definitely affects our listening and speaking, our interaction, social skills, and reading comprehension.
Yes, and it's interesting when you look at all of these things on the list and you see that they're all linked to reading in different ways. Really, it's all part of one big thing, but it can be very useful just to cut them up so you can start talking about the phonological aspect of something or the semantic aspect of something, even though in every child's mind they are somehow interlinked. You can either look at them as a whole or you can pull them apart to discuss them separately and to study them separately.
That's true, and there's so many different perspectives on how children learn these things, from the holistic to people who do more skill-based.
Yeah, and there's, you know, often feedback. Even if you do think, you know, it starts at a lower level and feeds up, there's often, you know, feedback loops where your higher level skills come back down. For example, phonological awareness is really useful for reading, but then the better you read, then in turn the better phonological awareness you have, so there's loops.
They reinforce.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting and it's so complicated, so we hope we helped you learn some terms.
Thanks.